I've never been one of those people fascinated by the dark web. As a 16-year-old girl in high school, I had much better things to do. I prefer to hang out with my friends and get my nails done, than spend all my time on the internet searching for this dark web. One day at school though, my friend Kelly was telling me about how her boyfriend was dared to go on the dark web. There's some weird stuff on there. He said it was really creepy with videos of cults and sacrifices, Kelly said. Why would someone even want to see that stuff? It's disgusting, I said. Yeah, I wouldn't, that's for sure, Kelly said. At lunch that day, all my friends were talking about Robbie's dare and how one of us should do the dare. I didn't say anything as I didn't even want to think about having to go on the dark web. Rape, killers, weapons, I knew it was on the dark web, and I wanted none of it. Hey guys, maybe Charlotte should do the dare, my other friend Christine said. Heck no guys, I'm not going on that creepy website, I said quickly. Then they all started chanting, do it, do it, do it, do it. People were starting to stare as I turned red. Finally, after more people started to join in, I gave up. Fine, I'll go on that stupid website, I screamed. They all started to cheer, with Kelly saying, okay, but just to make sure you do, you have to FaceTime me while you're going on. And don't worry, I'll have Robbie send you a link, she said with a smile. I was furious with them, but I didn't say anything. Who cares? I'll just close my eyes when I see anything bad. They didn't say I had to look, I thought. That night, I got a text from Robbie giving me a link to a website. He also said in the text, good luck. I got goosebumps reading it, but I wasn't going to chicken out as I knew my friends would never let me forget it. I FaceTimed Kelly as I was loading the link onto my computer, saying, this is so stupid. I can't believe I let you guys talk me into it. Oh, don't be like that. How about this? You only have to click on one site on the dark web, and that's it. I'll tell everyone you went on, and we'll all have a good laugh, Kelly said on the phone. The link loaded, and I was taken to a black screen with a skull in the middle and a whole bunch of links all in red. I gulped as I decided to click on the third link. I was taken to some kind of auctioning website. It didn't seem bad at first, but then I read the auctions. The auctions had female names attached to them with a link. I clicked on a random link, which had a picture taken from a car of a girl walking home from school. She looked about my age with dark brown hair and green eyes. It had a description underneath that said, Tiffany Smith, age 16, high school, Adelante High, parents, Martha and Gordon Smith, hair colour, brown, eyes, green, body description, small but packaged with good sized breasts and a small waist, price, $20,000. What do you see? Kelly said on the phone. It's some kind of sick auction where they're selling girls, I said in a shaky voice. Are you serious? Call the police right now, she screamed on the phone. As I was about to hang up the call and dial 911, I froze as I saw a name at the top of the list. Charlotte Miller. I freaked out and started to cry. I don't know why, but I clicked on the link next to my name. The picture was also taken from a car of me walking home from school. The description said, Charlotte Miller, age 16, high school, Spring Hill High, parents, Cindy and Harry Miller, hair colour, blonde, eyes, brown, body description, excellent body with curvy hips and great sized breasts, price, $60,000. I screamed and started to cry. Kelly tried to talk to me, but I couldn't hear her. I hung up the phone and ran to my parents' room. They heard me and ran out of their room before I could even come in. I told my dad about the website, which he and my mum checked on. They called the police shortly after. After looking at the website, also they said there was nothing they could do. The link was untraceable, so they couldn't figure out where the website came from. They said they would keep an office nearby my house in case someone came. After that, they left. I slept in my parents' room that night. I didn't get any sleep as the image of me walking home from school and the description of me were all burnt into my mind. How did they know all this? Were they going to come for me? I thought the whole night. I told Kelly and my friends everything that happened as they all listened in shock. They apologised for making me go on the website and said that we should all hang out after and go shopping to get my mind off what happened. I agreed as we made plans to meet at the mall at 4. I asked Kelly if she could walk home with me, but she said she was getting a ride from her mum. Panicking, I called my parents and asked if they could pick me up, but they weren't even home from work as they were stuck in traffic. I somehow got the courage to walk home by myself as I started walking to my house. You'll be okay, you're only 15 minutes away from your house, and it's the afternoon. No one is going to do anything with people around, I thought to myself as I walked. As I walked though, I could see out the corner of my eye a man walking behind me, fast. I started to speed up my walking, but he followed and got faster as well. I freaked out and started to run and didn't look back. I ran all the way to my house as I fumbled for the keys in front of the door. Just as I was about to put the key in, I felt a prick in my shoulder and the world faded to black. I woke up to find myself in a dark room, lit only by a computer in front of me. In the computer I saw that it was on a Google Meet with at least 50 people on it. When I tried to move, I found myself chained to the ground. I screamed and pleaded for help through the computer, but with no avail. Then as I looked in the camera, I saw a figure emerge from the shadows. He wore black jeans and a black hood. I couldn't see his face in the dark. He came up right behind me and spoke in a deep voice to the computer. How much? I saw in horror as the people in the meet started numbering off prices. 60,000, 80,000, 90,000. The biggest price came shortly after, 115,000. There were no prices named after that. The man then spoke. Going once, going twice, sold. 2 days later, Kelly stares at the poster in her hand, tears in her eyes as she reads, Missing, Charlotte Miller. She cries even more as she sees a smiling picture of Charlotte on the poster, looking so happy with her glistening blonde hair and brown eyes. Charlotte, I'm so sorry. My whole life I've been a Thomas the Tank Engine fan. Even as I got older, I still love watching the episodes and playing with my engines. People at school and my family always made fun of me for being Thomas's fan at 12 years old, but I didn't care. I loved Thomas the Tank Engine. My father hated that I still loved Thomas. He always told me to grow up and quit being a baby. He tried getting me into sports like basketball or football, but I just didn't care for them. All I cared about was watching Thomas and playing with all my toy engines. My mum was the only one who supported my love for Thomas. She always would get me new toy engines on my birthday, and she would always buy me new episodes when I ran out. My parents would always fight about my obsession with Thomas. I would hear them outside my room at night arguing. Damn it, Jess, he's almost 13 years old. He needs to grow up, my father said. Stop it, Dave. He loves a kid's show. So what? Instead of making fun of him and bullying him, you should support him and love him, my mother said. They argued a lot back then. Every time they argued, I would cry, knowing their problems were caused by me. I tried to get into other things. My parents bought me a PlayStation. I tried playing Fortnite, Call of Duty and Halo, but I just didn't enjoy playing them. All I ever truly enjoyed were my Thomas episodes and my toy trains, nothing else. One day when I got back from school, I decided to watch an episode. I went into my closet where I kept all the DVDs of Thomas. As I looked around for a new episode to watch, something caught my eye. It was an old VHS tape tucked away in the back of the closet. I reached over and grabbed it, staring at the title scribbled on a piece of tape that read, Sir Topham Hatt's Day Off. That's strange, I said aloud to no one. I looked around at the rest of the closet, which was full of DVDs, but no VHS tapes. I didn't have a VHS player in the living room, but I knew my parents had one in their room. I headed upstairs where I'm greeted by my father at the top. What have you got there, son? He asked, pointing at the tape. Oh, just an old movie. I lie. He snatched the tape before I could react. He looked at it slowly and then asked, Is this a Thomas episode? Yes, I said, knowing I couldn't lie. My father stared at me hard and long. He looked in a way a father looks at his son who's failed a test, or the way a father disapproves of something. He handed me the VHS tape back and said, Son, do you have any friends? I paused and then lied, saying, Yeah, of course I do. Don't lie to me. I'm your father. I can tell when you're lying. I hang my head down in shame. Tears slowly form in my eyes. Son, until you get over this stupid obsession, no one is going to want to be your friend. I just want you to be happy, son. That's all, he said. Crying now, I can barely get out. Okay. He handed me the tape and walked downstairs slowly. I cried for a good minute on top of the stairs. I wish my father was proud of me, but I knew all he saw in me was a big baby, a failure of a son. After I wipe the tears away and head into my parents' room, this will be my final episode, I think to myself. My parents have a big room with white walls painted with flowers, with the carpet a silky golden colour, and their bed is huge with red colours. The real prize though is the flat screen TV. It was a newer model that stretched almost the whole length of the wall. I spot the VHS tape player under the TV, I walk over to it and put the tape in. I grab the remote, which is sitting on the desk drawer near the bed, and turn the TV on. The screen is white before the movie starts to play. The episode started out with no theme, song or narration, just Sir Topham Hatt sitting in his office, writing in a journal. He wrote for a good 5 minutes before he put the pen down and looked outside the window to his office. The trains were busy as usual, carrying loads of coal or picking up passengers from the station. Sir Topham Hatt just stared at them, silently with a frown on his face. He then walked over to his desk and began to write again. The video then cut to Thomas at the Knapford station, waiting to pick up passengers. Thomas has this weird look on his face. His face is scrunched up in an almost painful way, and his eyes are a dark red now, instead of black. He picked up the passengers and started to drive. He still had that painful look on his face as he drove, like if you accidentally bumped your head into a wall. There was still no narrator, so the only thing you can hear was the sound of Thomas chugging along the tracks. Thomas dropped the passengers off at the next station, then started to head back to the Tidmouth sheds. For those of you that aren't acquainted with Thomas the Tank Engine, that's where he and the other trains lived and slept. Once he got back, the sky turned a reddish-yellow colour, like the colour of fire. He then headed over to his shed, and after getting inside, he closed his eyes and fell asleep. The video showed all the trains sleeping peacefully now. The only thing that could be heard was the sound of the crickets chirping and wind blowing. Then the video suddenly cut back to Sir Topham Hatt crying now. He was holding something in his hands that I couldn't see. He cried so loud and hard you would think someone he loved had died. He cried in a way that you can see his shadow shaking in the light. He then stopped suddenly, frozen in place. Then he slowly turned to the camera, and to my horror, his eyes went out bloodshot red, and he had an abnormally wide smile on his face with a gun in his hand. He walked out of his office and headed to the sheds where the trains were sleeping. He opened the gate for Thomas's shed and walked inside. He stared at Thomas with his wide red eyes for a good minute, and then to my horror, he slowly raised the gun and shot Thomas in the head. Thomas's eyes went white as blood, started to pour down out from his head. The trains were wide awake now from the gunshots. They started to panic as Sir Topham Hatt walked out of Thomas's shed, gun in hand. He walked over to Percy's shed and shot her in the head, and then did the same with James, Henry, Gordon, and everyone else. I was frozen with fear now. I could feel goosebumps all over me, and I tried to close my eyes, but I couldn't as I was glued to the TV. The image of the dead trains would haunt me long after that day. Nightmares would haunt my sleep for so long. The video now pans to each train, all with white eyes and a huge hole in their head, blood spilling out. Sir Topham Hatt's grin is now so wide, it looks as if his gums were going to snap. He turned to the camera now, staring right at me. It felt as if he was staring into my soul, with blood all over his jacket and face, smiling like it was his birthday. He then slowly raised the gun to his head, and I closed my eyes as I heard a loud bang from the TV. I didn't open my eyes for a good minute or two, and when I did, the TV was blank. I sit, unable to move, petrified with fear. Somehow I break out this trance. I run over and grab the VHS tape out of the player, turning off the TV in the process. I ran downstairs and threw the VHS tape into the garbage. I then ran back upstairs into my room and froze. I saw my trains and posters of Thomas in my room, and the sight of them made me reach my breaking point. I screamed as I ripped off all the posters and started to throw my trains against the wall. My parents came rushing in and tried to calm me down, but I couldn't. I was overwhelmed and terrified. The image of Thomas and everyone was burnt into my head, and worst of all was the image of Sir Topham Hatt and his wide, bloody smile. It's been 2 years since I saw the tape. My parents hired a therapist to try and help me cope with what I saw. It didn't help. I was mentally broken at this point. I'd have nightmares of Sir Topham Hatt and the dead bodies of the trains every night, and I would wake in a hot sweat screaming after each one. As time went on though, I started to forget about the tape slowly. My therapist gave me a trick for when I would think about the tape. She gave me a small red stress ball. I know, real cheesy, but it did help. Every Every time I would think about the tape and the images, I would just squish the ball and somehow that made me forget about them. Today was my last appointment with my therapist. "How are you feeling, Greg?" she said after we sat down in her office. "Good," I said. "It's been 2 years now since the incident happened. Do you think you've recovered from it fully?" she said. "I think so. I haven't had any nightmares recently or thought about the images." "Good. Well then, I'll make this session short by giving you a little test to see if you've truly recovered," she said. She opened up a bag and pulled out Thomas the Tank Engine toy. At first I started to panic, sweating profusely and squishing my stress ball faster and faster. The memories started to come back. "It's okay, Greg. Just breathe," she said. I started to calm my breathing and I closed my eyes and opened them and stared at the Thomas toy. She handed it to me slowly and I inspected it. It looked like the old one I had before I threw it away with the rest of my trains, DVDs and anything else I had to do with Thomas. Now I felt nothing when I looked at the train. I just saw a toy and nothing else. I handed the toy back to her as she said, "Good, you've passed the final test. I think you're all good to go," she said as she stood up. "Thanks for helping me, Dr. Slayer," I said as I started to walk out. "Of course, Greg, I'll miss having you as my patient," she said as I walked out. I walked out of her office and outside where my mom picked me up. As we drove home, I turned on the radio, which broadcasted a story that I turned up to listen to. "Breaking news in the area as a 10-year-old girl has been found dead in her house," it says, then continues. "The child was found in her parents' bedroom where she shot herself with her father's gun that they kept in a drawer near the TV. When the parents found her, the TV was blank, and when inspected there was a tape inside. The tape contained a Thomas the Tank Engine episode called Sir Topham Hatt's Day Off. Local authorities have declared the death a suicide and..." My mum then quickly shut off the radio, turned to me and said, "Honey, are you okay?" I couldn't speak or move. The images now and the tape all came flying back to me. I squished my ball harder and faster than I've ever had before, but it didn't help. The dead trains, the blood, the smile all came running back to me as I let out a loud scream in the car. As soon as I got home, I ran up to my room and went to my computer where I'm typing this now. This is not a joke. Do not try to find the tape or watch it. It's not worth it. Somehow I got lucky that day. That girl who watched it didn't. I write this also as a warning to parents. If your kids are Thomas the Tank Engine fans, be careful what you buy. Always check the DVDs. If a child sees this tape, well, I think we know what will happen. Please, I beg all of you parents, people, or anyone, if you find a Thomas the Tank Engine episode called Sir Topham Hatt's Day Off, don't watch it. Have you ever felt a strong presence from the woods? A feeling like you're being watched? Well, the truth is someone is watching you from the trees and shadows. Monsters hide in the woods, preying on the innocents and striking quickly. They won't stop, they never will. This is my story, and I hope it serves as a warning to all about the truth of the woods and how dangerous it truly is, how dangerous they are. Growing up, I never had a dad. My father left me and my mum when I was young, and I haven't seen him since. Sure, I get the occasional birthday or Christmas card with money, but besides that, he's almost a stranger to me. After my father left, my mother decided to leave the city life behind, and we moved when I was 10 to Wisconsin, where we bought a small cabin out in the woods. At first I hated living there. The woods always terrified me as a kid. Every time I looked out the window towards the woods, I always got an unsettling feeling. Chills would run down my spine, and I would start to shake uncontrollably. I always felt something was watching me. The feeling never went away, even as I got older. I hated the walk to school I had to make every day. The looming feeling of getting watched even grew stronger as I walked in the woods. I felt so vulnerable looking at the tall trees. The woods I lived by had almost an endless stretch of tall trees in the forest. I felt something was watching me up on the trees. My mum, though, felt completely different about the woods. She loved them. She loved taking walks outside and just staring at the trees in the forest, taking all of nature in. She was an artist, so she just loved to sit outside and paint the trees. Many of the portraits in our cabin were the trees in the forest. I asked her if she ever felt a presence when she was out there, like something watching her. "Yes, I feel a strong presence, but it's a comforting one," she said. "I feel safe and protected." I never understood why she had such a comfortable feeling from the woods, while I had a terrifying one that kept me wide awake almost every night. On one night, when I was about to go to sleep, I saw something from the trees. It was far off into the distance, but I could barely make out the silhouette of a figure. It was big and bulky with long arms, and from the angle it looked like it was staring at me. I froze as I stared at it. Then I heard my mum walk into my room. When I turned to see her open the door, I looked back to see the figure gone. I tried telling my mum, but she never listened. She said I was simply imagining things, that I needed to quit being scared of the woods. The woods protect us from the outside world, Michael. They're a shield to all the bad things in the world. I knew what I saw, and I knew whatever it wasn't protecting me. On the way to school that morning, I felt the presence stronger than ever. Every time I turned around though, nothing was there. Suddenly, I heard a branch snap behind me and I didn't dare turn around. I couldn't move. Then I heard another branch snap. I took off running. I could hear fast steps behind me as I was running, which made me run faster. I could hear the footsteps gaining on me. When it seemed they were right on me, I burst out of the woods, sweating like a pig. The day went by normal. Once school was over, I asked my friend James if he wanted to walk home with me. James was my best friend and the only person who understood my fear of the woods. He lived close to me and he could also feel a disturbing presence watching him. He tried telling his parents like I did with mine, but they didn't listen either. "Dude, did that really happen?" he asked as I told him about what happened on the walk to school. "Yeah, man. I just don't feel comfortable walking in those woods alone, man. I know there's something in there," I said. "What do you think it is?" James asked as we started walking home. "I don't know. I think I saw it last night though. It was like really big with huge long arms. It was far away so I couldn't see anything else." He was quiet now. Then he said, "I think I've seen it too. I saw something last night too. It was a lot like the thing you describe." Then we heard a loud snap behind us and turned around to see a tree branch on the ground snapped in half. "Dude, something's following us. We need to run," James said. "No, don't run. I did that and it chased me. Maybe if we keep walking slowly, it won't do anything." James, looking terrified at me, nodded his head slowly as we started walking. We heard more snaps as we walked, getting louder and closer as we walked. I looked over at James. He looked back at me, white as a ghost. After what felt like an hour, I could see the outline of my house in the distance. Our pace quickened as we got closer and closer to my house, the snaps and cracks quickening as well behind us. As soon as we got close enough, we took off in a dead sprint towards my house, not looking back. We ran inside and I locked the door once we were inside. "Everything okay?" I heard my mum say behind me. We looked at each other, then I heard James say, "Yeah, Mrs. S, we just raced each other to the house." She looked at me and I nodded quickly. "Okay, just be careful with the door. It's old and I don't want it falling off." "Okay, sorry Mum," I said as James started to run off up the stairs. Once upstairs and in my room, James said, "Dude, we can't walk that way to school." "I know, but what will we tell our parents? They won't believe us," I said. James was silent now. I knew we wouldn't be able to come up with anything. "I think as long as we're quiet and walk slow, that thing won't come after us," I said. "Yeah, let's hope so," James said in a quivering voice. James went home shortly after that, and after I ate dinner, I headed upstairs to bed. What is that thing? I thought as I laid in bed. A person? An animal? It's fast like an animal, but it looks like a tall person. I looked out the window into the dark forest and froze. The thing was there, and closer. I could make out more characteristics as I stared at it. It had a hunchback and long fingers with razor-sharp claws. I didn't see any eyes on it, but I could somehow feel its cold stare locked on me. It just stared, observing me. Then it turned around and walked back into the forest. That is no person or animal, I thought to myself. It wants me. I'm its prey. After a restless night of sleep, I woke up and walked downstairs to see my mum sitting at the counter with a worried look on her face. "Hey Mum, everything okay?" I asked. "Morning, honey. I have some bad news," she said as she looked at me. "What is it?" I asked. "Your friend James, well, he's missing. His parents went into his room this morning and he was gone." I stood there petrified. It wasn't following us. It was tracking us. Tracking James. "You okay, Michael?" she asked. I could only see James's face in my mind now, the image of him looking at me as we were walking home, white as a ghost. I couldn't keep everything in, and I told my mum everything. The thing that chased me and James being stalked by it, and seeing it for the past 2 nights getting closer to me. "You've got to believe me, Mom," I pleaded. "Something is in those woods, and it took James, and now I think it's going to take me." She looked at me with a sad expression. She sighed, then said, "I know this must be hard for you, Michael, but there's nothing in those woods. James might have ran away, or anything could have happened." "Mom, it took him. James would never run away from his parents," I said. She looked at me, then at the clock behind me. "I think it's time you go to school now, dear. We'll talk about this later." I pleaded with my mom to drive me to school, begged her on my knees. She finally relented after a few minutes. Okay, just this one time. We'll need to leave now though, and be quick. I have to get to the studio." I thanked her and ran to get my backpack and stuff. Nothing happened on the drive as I expected. After dropping me off at the front of the school, everyone ran up to me and asked if I heard about what happened to James. Everyone was talking about James that day. They started rumours either saying he ran away or was kidnapped. "Do you know what happened to him?" Sally asked frantically as she ran up to me at lunch. She had a crush on James since the 2nd grade, and even though James showed no signs of affection towards her, she still adored him. She was a short girl with short brown hair and brown eyes. I debated about whether I should tell Sally the truth, but I knew she wouldn't believe me. No one would. I told her I didn't know and tried to continue eating my lunch, but she wouldn't give up. "Come on, Michael, you're his best friend. Please, if you know anything that could have happened to him, please tell me," she said with tears in her eyes. I tried ignoring her, but she wouldn't stop. Then her friends came over and started asking. Then more and more people came asking if I knew what happened to James. The voices became too much for me and I screamed, "I don't know what happened to him. Please leave me alone." I screamed as loud as I could. Everyone stopped talking now and stared at me. My cheeks started to turn red as I got embarrassed. The bell rang and everyone started heading off to class, leaving me still sitting at the lunch table. I packed my unfinished lunch and started to head off to my science class, which I had next. I decided then and there that I would find James. I had to know if he was alive or not. "James, if you're still alive, I'll find you." After school, I called my mom and asked if she could pick me up. She said she could, and 5 minutes later, she pulled up in a white Cadillac. As we drove home, she asked, "Feeling better, honey?" I lied, saying, "Much better." I knew she would never believe me. I was going to have to face that thing on my own. We got home and I headed straight upstairs where I dumped all my school supplies on my bed and started to pack gear for that night. I packed spare flashlight batteries, some water, and I put the pepper spray my mum gave me last year in my pocket, just in case. As I was eating dinner, I came up with a plan. I would sneak out of the house when my mum went to bed, which is usually around 10, and I would head into the woods and try to look for James. I knew my chances against that thing were slim to none, so I knew I would have to be quiet and careful. After dinner, I went to my room and waited. I waited for hours until I looked over my clock, which read 10:30 p.m. I hopped out of bed and walked over to the window, opening it quietly. I made a little rope with my bed sheets as I waited, as I knew I wouldn't be able to jump out of the window without getting hurt. I tied the rope against my bed and started to climb out of the house slowly. Once down, I turned my flashlight on and aimed it towards the woods. It was even more terrifying now. The trees seemed endless and I couldn't even see the moon. I took a deep breath and started to walk slowly into the woods. I noticed something that started to scare me quickly once I was walking. There was absolute silence. Not a peep, no crickets, no owls, nothing. I flashed my light around quickly, calling out James's name quietly. James, are you there?" Nothing but silence echoes from the woods. I walked towards the directions of James's house, thinking he may be around there. As I'm about halfway to his house, the battery for my flashlight dies. Darkness now engulfs me as I panic. I scramble for the batteries in my backpack. Once I find them, I take the dead batteries out of my flashlight, put the new ones in. When I turned my lights back on, I screamed. Standing in front of me was the thing. The fear I felt was indescribable. Even to this day, the image of it still fills my dreams with nightmares. It had no skin. It was all red muscles and tissues. It had no eyes, and its mouth was full of dozens of razor-sharp teeth as it smiled and drooled, looking down at me. It was at least 9 feet tall, and it had a bad hunch to its back. Its claws were even sharper close up, as sharp as its teeth were. Its upper body was big and bulky, where its long legs were skinny as a twig. Its arms were huge, with big muscles and bulging veins. I screamed even more as it bent down and picked me up by the head. It dragged me across the woods as I kicked and screamed, "Stupid, stupid, stupid, stupid. What the hell were you thinking coming into the woods?" I thought. It dragged me until I eventually passed out. When I woke, I found myself in a dark cave, hanging upside down by at least 5 feet. The cave looked ancient, with 3 tunnels that led into darkness. I'd never seen this cave in the woods, never even knew there was one in the first place. The light that was in the cave was from a single fire in the middle. I could see my backpack on the ground with my phone near it. I tried to reach and grab it, but I couldn't move. The thing had wrapped ropes around my ankles to the sharp rocks above me. I was hopeless. I thought about James now as I started to look around the cave. In one of the corners of the cave saw a single orange t-shirt on the ground. That's James's shirt, I realised. Suddenly, I heard heavy steps walking towards me. I saw the thing walk into the cave as it stared at me. I panicked and started screaming again. Then the thing spoke in a dark and gruff voice. "Quiet, food. Maybe I'll let you live a little longer." I shut up now, petrified as it spoke to me. I saw in its hand a leg. Oh God, please let that not be James, I thought. It spoke again now. "I've been watching you for a long time. You've always looked the most appetizing of everyone." It lifted up the leg in its hand and said, "Your friend here tasted wonderful, but I think you'll taste even better," it said with a twisted grin on its face. I started to cry, weeping at the loss of my friend and knowing that I would follow in his footsteps. Somehow I got out question in a shaky voice. What are you?" The thing looked down at me for a moment, thinking, and then said, "I'm an ancient being. My kind is almost extinct as there are only a few of us left. We have ruled the woods for the past centuries, preying on anything that steps foot on any of our lands. Over time, hunters have come and killed most of my kind. Now we hide in the shadows, only coming out when food is near." I think for a moment before asking another question. "Do you only eat young kids?" The thing now smiled, showing off its dozen of teeth as it said, "Of course, kids taste the best, very juicy and sweet." It had cut me off the ropes with its claws, squeezing me with its ginormous hands that started to open its mouth. I was able to ask one more question. "How can you hunt without any eyes?" It stared at me, closing its mouth before saying, "I can track your scent. My nose serves as my eyes, as I have none. I smell my food out before I come for it at night. Lucky for me, I didn't have to come for you. You came to me." It opened its mouth wide as I panicked, starting to throw myself around to try to get out of its grasp. "Hold still, food," it boomed at me. I was somehow able to move my hands to my pocket, where miraculously I felt the pepper spray that didn't fall out of my pocket. I acted quickly as I got closer to the thing's mouth and pulled out the pepper spray and sprayed it into its face. It shrieked as it dropped me, crying and holding its face. I got up quickly and ran towards the middle entrance where the creature came from. I ran as fast as I could, hearing the creature giving chase behind me. I ran until I somehow found the entrance to the cave. I saw light illuminating from the entrance as I ran with all my might into the day. I kept running even after I was out of the cave. I ran and never looked back. I was somehow able to navigate my way through the forest to the cabin. I gave a sigh of relief once I saw the cabin and stopped running. I looked behind me now, expecting the thing to be right behind me, ready to strike. Nothing was there. I walked back to the cabin out of breath. When I opened the door, my mum ran towards me, embracing me as she cried, "Where have you been? I've called the police and they couldn't find you. I thought I'd lost you." I didn't say anything. I was tired and hungry, but worst of all, I was terrified knowing that more of these things were out there, waiting for me. We moved shortly after that to Chicago and moved in with my aunt. I grew up normally and made new friends in Chicago. Even got a new best friend called Kyle. I never forgot about James though. He was my first best friend who had my back and died in the hands of a monster. The thought of that thing still haunts me now. I tried telling my mum what happened many times, but I couldn't. I knew she still wouldn't believe me. What scares me the most is knowing that there are still more of those things out there, hunting in the shadows. I write this story to tell everyone, to warn everyone of these things. They hunt for children, feasting on them. Be careful near the woods. You never know what lurks in the shadows of the trees. Please, don't ever go into the woods at night. They are watching and waiting for you. At 12 years old, I moved from the urban metropolis of this city to its expansive rural outskirts. I made friends quickly. I found a girlfriend my first week. I was so relieved. I was terrified of moving. The only thing is, at the time, I was an incredibly skinny kid. I'd get pushed around and roughed up a bit by the bigger kids, including my friends. I've been in this town since August. It was now late October, and around here, Halloween seemed more festive than in the city. Farmers would put scarecrows around the properties, pumpkins grew in abundance, apples also grew, which meant homegrown apple cider. There was one haunted house in this entire town. It didn't even have a name. It was a big black tent fashioned into the entrance of a barn by a man who owned the property, named Harvey. Everyone seemed to love Harvey. An elderly man, I'd wager that he was over 70. I recall a woman who was the mother of a classmate of mine reminiscing about him the old days, when she would go there. Immediately, I noticed his missing bottom, front teeth, his overalls and suspenders over a thick red plain long sleeve shirt. His jowls hung like raw steaks, peppered with a rough white 5 o'clock shadow, and if you'd come within smelling distance, you inhaled the distinct scent of corn and body odour. Next to his barn was a tiny wooden house. Each year he'd set this up and charge $5 admission. To be honest, it looked shitty, but nobody cares, it was a haunted house. Once we finally entered, my friends and I took off running. We could hear the adults yelling at us, and this is when I slipped and fell on the muddy, wet grass. I'd rolled my ankle by not paying attention in the dark. I screamed for help, and eventually Harvey picked me up with another woman, helped me walk out. As they did, Harvey was saying something to me, but his pungent breath made me a little inattentive to his words. A wasted night. Several days later, and with a vast improvement of my ankle pain, I went to ride my bike. Trails galore out here. I wanted to go back to Harvey's. I knew the path, so I took off, went through a bumpy dirt path through the woods, crossed over the creek and rode up a hill through a very lengthy row of corn stalks before it opened up to Harvey's farm. Only I noticed it was all black. No lights on anywhere. The tent was attached to the barn as usual, but damn. Weekday, I said to myself, with disappointment. The sun was down over the horizon. The sky was vanilla, fading to dark blue. I could see the frost in my mouth and my nose, unusually cold. I just stood there with my bike, thinking about all the riding I just did to ultimately find out I've just waited an hour. Screw it. I decided to walk through his tent anyway. I walked my bike across his property while keeping an eye on the house. This is when his outside floodlight came on. Motion detected. I'll admit, I found Harvey to be a little off when I first saw him. And then, remembering what he said to me the other night as he helped me out of the tent the other day, "You want real horror? Then you should come by while I'm gutting the pig." Followed by a laugh that sounded like he may have had a tracheotomy. I sped across the property to the tent as fast as I could. This guy already gave me bad vibes, and I didn't need him seeing or knowing that I'd done anything. Within a minute, the light went out. I parked my bike on the other side of the tent away from his house, so that if he would wake up and look outside, he wouldn't see anything. And then, crunch, crunch, crunch on the frozen dirt just ahead of me at the entrance. Harvey appeared before my eyes, walking toward me from out of the tent. I was speechless, stunned and shocked. Harvey smiled at me with those hideous teeth. Just as he began speaking, he hacked up and spit out some phlegm to the ground, nearly at my damn feet. "You're gonna have to trade something for me not to report you trespassing," he spoke angrily, but still with that toothless grin, grabbing and rubbing his crotch. I'm sorry," I spoke to him in such a deflating tone. "I just wanted to, well, I wasn't doing anything. I was just riding my bike. I didn't realise I was in your yard." "How long have you been in here? Did you go in there?" asked Harvey with a toolbox in his hand, pointing behind himself with the other. "You want to see the haunted house, don't you?" Harvey began stepping closer and closer to me. I didn't want to go. I began to smell that stench. He was breathing heavily and sweating, even though it was 35 degrees out. Yeah, kinda, I replied with an obviously anxious disposition, which I could tell easily he was reading. You definitely didn't come in here, right? Gulp. No, sir. Fine. You want to see a real haunted house? This dude is scaring me enough. I don't need a haunted house at this point, or for the rest of my life. Come on back, he yelled in a cheery tone with that ghastly, scratchy voice. However, his eyes, the look he gave me, just looked like things were in his head. As he entered the tent, he looked back at me as I froze at the entrance. I gotta drag you back here or what? Drag? I thought. Time to make a run for it. What are you waiting for, kid? He spoke, incensed with anger as he began to walk towards me with forceful stomps, causing mud to splash in his face. I started backing up. I told you that you're trespassing. Now I know you're dead. He's a cop. How happy you think he'd be if he had to come out here and pick you up in a squad car? I stared at the mud cascading down his hanging cheeks. Just the fact that he didn't even attempt to wipe that off was very distressing. He had a point though. I would be in deep shit, and technically I was trespassing. You're gonna have to give me something. My bike? The words just shot out of me without thought. Bike? What the hell am I gonna do with your damn bike? I can barely walk now, son. He grabbed a hold of his crotch once again. He noticed my awareness of what he was doing, so, with a yellow smile, he said, You afraid? He began making faces at me, crossing his eyes and sticking out his tongue. He let out a raspberry where his spit literally hit me on the face. He moved forward again, inches away, and looked down at me. He must have been 6'3". I've never been so intimidated. He placed his hand on my shoulder, causing my heart to skip. Come on, it'll be fun. I felt helpless, so idiotically I followed. He led me through the labyrinth. There were fake skeletons and mannequins and scary masks. I assume he hired people to dress up, which made sense as to why virtually nothing was in there. The end opened up to the barn. I stared back as he shone his flashlight. We walked inside of the barn. Harvey shined his light directly ahead. A dead pig hung from the rafters by its back legs. Harvey turned on a spotlight, resting on the floor in order to light up the room. I could smell pig. Check this out, he said excitedly. He reached into his toolbox and pulled out an enormous butcher's knife and stuck it into the belly of the pig and began carving. Blood began spraying. I noticed the pig's mouth moving. The side of its head was caved in surely from blunt force trauma, but the convulsing seemed as if, well, you know. Harvey began ripping out its intestines and other body parts. You know the anatomy of a pig is the same as a human, don't you? Then, a muffled, high-pitched cry materialized from the far corner of the room, inside of a stable. It sounded oddly human, but muffled. I stood frozen with wide eyes, terrified. Harvey looked over in that general direction, and then back at me, covered in blood. His demeanor went from creepy to outright worry on his part. We stared at each other down like a get chicken. Another cry, only this time, through whatever caused the muffled sound, I heard, "Help!" followed by crying. Without thinking, I turned and ran, and just as I did, Harvey spewed out a "son of a bitch!" He began running after me, but he was old and he limped. I grabbed my bike and rode away as fast as I fucking could. I was home in 10 minutes, and I immediately told my dad what happened. Soon after, police flooded his property. They had no warrant to search. They just wanted to ask questions, but his blood-drenched arms gave them probable cause. In the barn, they found the hacked-up remains of a 13-year-old girl named Andrea that had went missing 6 months ago, mouth stuffed with a dirty rag and taped with duct tape all around her head. She was the sister of someone I went to school with. After I left, he killed her, and I assumed began dismembering her and body to bury the body. A shovel and pick were found near the remains, also with blood on them. They had Harvey dead twice, and he knew it, so he confessed to 4 more disappearances and led police to the locations, one of which dated all the way back to 1969. I've always felt like she was brutally murdered because of me, because I saw her, which prompted Harvey to dispense of the evidence. The news story followed from a coroner's examination. She'd been raped and beaten badly by Harvey. Though her arms were cut off, they remained in cuffs attached to chains which ran to the wall. They said she was hit in the head and died of trauma. Harvey will now die in prison. I thank God that he was old and slow, or else I'd be in a stable right now, having God knows what happening to me. I hope Andrea is at peace.